I'm Dane Rose. The first time I wanted to die was in the 13, 14-year-old period. And looking back, it was a combination of complex PTSD without diagnosis and relief, a combination of loneliness without the ability to bridge the gap, because the more different one is in a socially illiterate culture. And what I mean by that is relationships rely on relationship technology. And our relationship technology is one of the most bungling processes you can imagine in action. You watch young teenagers trying to get on a date. It's kind of like trying to refuel a plane, in midair and banging into the other plane. It's an incredibly crude technology. And the more different a person is, the more difficult it is for such a crude technology to bridge the gap. And I have Asperger's-like tendencies, complex D by the time I was 8 years old from various childhood traumas. In a childhood in which you're in an illiterate culture in areas such as trauma, I never heard the word once. But I would go to, doctors. I went to a Waldorf school, and so I went to curative eurythmists and anthroposophical doctors and did homeopathy. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was trauma. The issue was abuse at home. And that wasn't gone into. Now, there's a phenomena when a child is abused through all manner of reasons, like some of my complex PTSD came from being knocked over repeatedly at 2 years old by the family dog and then smothered in a culture in which there was no attunement to repair that trauma. And when you look at it from an adult's eyes, that sounds fine. But if you're looking at it from a child's eyes, in which you're in an unsafe and volatile environment, and suddenly, just imagine how you would be if a 12-foot dog leaped up at you and you ran for as fast as you could, but you were in tall bamboo that was over your head, because that's what grass feels like to a 2-year-old. You're running through tall bamboo and you know it's going to get you at any moment, and then it pounces and smothers you and you scream and no one comes for help. And then that happens over and over again as if it's no big deal. That alone can leave you to feel that your life is permanently in danger. And that's as an adult with a 12-foot giant wolf or whatever it is. That's how a child experiences reality. And we are completely illiterate about these types of things. Now, when these types of things occur in an illiterate culture, trauma illiteracy, emotional illiteracy, PTSD illiteracy, when these things occur in an abusive and uneducated culture, the focus of blame or shame goes to the child, to the individual that's expressing symptoms. And it would be a little bit like if I gave you a syringe of arsenic. I stuck it in, plunged the plunger, and you began to spasm. And so calling the doctor says, "What did you do wrong? What did you eat?" And you say nothing, and the doctor kind of rolls their eyes like, "This idiot must have done something wrong. Why is he spasming? Why don't you stop spasming?" I can't, And nobody's looking at the syringe. Nobody's looking at the fact that I filled you with poison. Well, if this happens too many times, and particularly when it's called love, you begin to feel that the entire incompetence of the culture around you is actually all your fault. Because no, the doctor doesn't say, well, did your parents hit you? Did your parents give you nightmares? Did your parents do this? No, the doctor says, how are you feeling? Why are you feeling that way? Let me give you these little sugar pills or this, whatever. That's what homeopathy is. And, let me do this and that and the other, and let's see if it improves. But it doesn't have anything to do with that. And so it doesn't improve. The doctor mumbles, you're a difficult case. Oh, I'm a difficult case. There's a way that when you are ignorant and ignorant of your own ignorance, and thus cause harm to another human being, and they express the symptoms of that harm. You cut open their face, but you're too dumb to know that tears their face apart. They start bleeding, and you ask them, well, why are you bleeding? Why are you screaming? Why are you so shy? Why are you not able to relate to other people? What's going on with you? And the question is never the other way around. What can we do to change our culture, our understanding, and what's wrong with us that we can't take an innocent, infant and protect it until, they're able to manage their own language? You can't protect yourself at 2 years old. You need a protector. So there's a phenomena of shame dumping, where the problems of the culture or the cult get transferred to the child. When the entire circle, the doctors, the parents of other peers, your parents, all the looks, your siblings, when everyone looks at you as if you are the symptom of the problem, and you are the symptom of the problem, but when being the symptom of the problem is confused with being the problem. If I cut your cheek open with a knife right now, and a rusty knife, I'm the problem because I don't know how to handle a knife, or I'm sadistic and I've just given you tetanus. But I'm not going to erupt in bumps. You are. Now, if I'm too dumb to know what I've done, then when you start getting symptoms of tetanus, I'm going to ask you, why did you do that? Well, why are you doing that? I'm not hitting you with a knife anymore. Why don't the bumps or whatever it is stop? And this is a profound area of childhood shame dumping and abuse that we are so ignorant of that we're ignorant of our ignorance. And who would have to look into that? Well, it would be the government, which would shed light on the incompetence of the culture and the parents, which would be unpopular. So that government doesn't get the votes. It would be the parents, but the more they look into it, the more they look into their own incompetence. Well, that's not terribly popular, to spend energy to learn how bad you are as a parent. Doesn't feel very good, does it? So parents don't do it. And if children spend the energy to do it, they're very small, so they're easy to bribe or shut up or hit, just stop it. If you do that, I'm going to send you to your room. Don't talk about that, or I'll send you to your room. And so the child can't compete, although they're bearing the symptoms. And then you have the phenomena of in which the child wants to make the parent feel better, the pleaser in the child, whose strategy of survival is to figure out everything that makes the parent happy, or the teacher happy, whatever it is, everything that makes them happy, and say all those things whether they're true or not. So you learn that mom smiles every time you say she's a great mother. So she hits you, she does this, she does that, you feel terrible. But you want to make her smile. Maybe she'll be nicer to you. So you say, Mom, you're a great mother. And she smiles. And you say, okay, that's what I have to say to, get a good reaction. But now your mother actually thinks it's true. And so carries on with the same behavior as before, just feeling better about it. And this brings intergenerational abuse cycles right into the focus. Incest cycles, violence cycles, verbal attack cycles. These are very common rampant intergenerational abuse cycles, addiction cycles, sexual abuse cycles. So these things go on generation after generation in our cult. The root word of culture is cult, where we all agree that we're going to do it this way, and then we all agree not to question what we're doing. And we all agree that as long as everyone else is doing what the vast majority is doing, that they're kind of off limits. Doesn't matter if being a single mother is good or bad for your child. It's what our cult dictates in order to exhibit the expressions of freedom and this and that and the other as we've defined balance and power and all this. So, women have got to be able to be free, and that means they've got to be able to work, and that means they've got to be able to work in the same jobs as men, and that means they're able to do this. So that's really important. And children are just going to have to put up with whatever is going on there so that the grown-up men and women can have their power struggle, expressed throughout that cultural shift, independent of the data of how that affects the child. Of course, the child is born helpless into this culture or this country with absolutely no ability to influence or speak about what it's like to be in here, and then they've never experienced the other, so they don't know. And of course, it's not very popular. It's not very popular if you're stuck being a single mother or in any of these little boxes that we find ourselves. It's not very popular to say, well, I'm permanently damaging my child by X degree, so it's easier just not to think about it. And when the child pipes up about it, don't make me feel guilty, here, have an ice cream cone. So I wanted to kill myself at age 13, 14, primarily because of a mixture of what I'd call the pain-pleasure mix. When you're in 6 times more pain than pleasure, and when you're helpless, it's very difficult for a teenager to break out of that when you're in an abusive household, because where do you go? Your government has abandoned you by saying you're your child's care until you're 18 years old. There's no government agency you can call up and say, I'm feeling terrible and I don't know what to do. And they say, well, here's some great options for you. No. So you're helpless. Your government isn't helping you. They say, okay, well, you can go to a foster home. Well, the government doesn't take good care of foster home. There's story after story after story about even worse, sexual and psychological abuse at foster homes. So it's not really a great care thing. Kids of foster homes aren't given an app and a weekly questionnaire and metadata so that, things can be gathered anonymously and changes can be made to the system, anything like that. It's just not a priority. It's not a priority on a governmental level. It's not a priority on a parental level. And when you're dealing with some of the most painful feelings imaginable, it doesn't help to be in a culture that is emotionally illiterate. Now, what do I mean by an emotionally illiterate culture? Well, let's take a common phenomena of saying, I hate you for doing this. And the common response of, it's bad to feel hatred towards your parents. Don't talk to me. I'll hit you. I'll beat you. I'll whatever. I'll throw you out. I'll basically threaten your survival for communicating that feeling. Did you ever experience someone saying, okay, well, let's talk about that. Hate, first of all, is a mix. It's a clue that you're in a certain situation. For example, you may not know this in an emotionally illiterate culture, but it is impossible to feel hate if helplessness is not in the mix. So, in other words, if you say, I really want to leave, but I can't leave. I really want to speak what I have to say, but I'll get punished. I really want to do something, but I don't know what to do. I really want to buy this, but I don't have the money. I really want to work, but my parents are blocking this and that and the other. And I really want to go and do these activities, but there are these bullies waiting for me on the street. And I really want to talk about my feelings to someone, but every fucking time I open my mouth, there's someone teasing and humiliating me, and there's absolutely no one to talk to. And so everything I try to do to make things better makes it worse. Okay, sounds pretty helpless to me. Hatred, despair, but also hatred may be one of the byproducts. Meaning, if you take away all that helplessness, hatred vanishes. I've got 3 safe people to talk to about anything I want with no backlash. I can buy whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. I can leave this abusive situation. You think that person feels hatred? No. They may, if they're deep in trauma and regressed means you're living the experience of a 2-year-old, for example. You're not 2 years old, or you can't listen to English. But if you feel 2 years old, you may feel hatred even when you're in abundance, meaning even if you've got money, etc., etc. Like I, at 44 years old, running a business, plenty of money, etc., feel hatred. At times when I connect with parts of me that are very young, frozen in traumatic states and helpless at that time, the feelings of hate are in the body from that age. When I'm in the present and noticing all my freedoms, etc., here at this age, not so much. So if you understand, for example, that you have to be helpless in order to feel hatred, and if you are no longer helpless, for example, you take the regression times, where I might feel hatred, I'm helpless to stop the regression because I'm just learning about trauma in a trauma-illiterate culture. And, it takes some time and some doing when a lot of even the authors don't agree with what's going on because, this author has this experience and this bias, this author has another. There's almost no large-scale studies that are being transformed into useful information for the general public in the United States. So the fact that you are trauma illiterate would be a given. Even if you've read 2 or 3 trauma books, do you actually, you read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, which is one of the best ones, and he'll throw up his hands. I don't know what to do here. This may work, this may work, this may work. There's a lot to know. This isn't going well. We don't know. And so, if you can't help but being regressed and going back to a younger age, well, why would you feel empowered if, some person or some word or some cue can just trigger you back and you feel terrified at 6 years old? Terrified. Giants all around me. I can't do this. I can't do that. Everyone's hurting me. And you feel that way. Or if a Vietnam veteran, a muffler backfires and suddenly they're back in Nam with machine gunnings and watching their best friend be destroyed and this and feeling the helplessness of it all. And then they're completely powerless to stop the cycle. They may feel hatred. Well, with any emotion, you can direct it outward or inward. And when you're dealing with suicide, you're dealing with taking all the charges of pain, etc., and attacking the self. Now, the environment produces the charge, meaning you have to be in pain, in helplessness, and in a fair amount of pain and have some anger and stuff to feel hate. Which means you've got to be in an environment that is so incompetent that not a single person is able and willing to help you. Or you've got to be in an environment that is so incompetent that you don't know how to let a single person help you, which in itself implies an incredibly incompetent environment. Why? Well, let's take men who hate receiving help. Well, you say, well, why do they hate receiving help? Babies didn't hate receiving help. Well, as a man, I've been rejected by, I don't know, probably about 1,000 women for being needy. Needing what? Needing help, needing something. I've watched probably 10,000 images in the news and the media, etc., about how being needy or needing help, etc., is weak. I've had dozens of women apologize to me for needing my help, indicating what a low status thing it is. And you're already feeling low status and low self-esteem because you've lost control and this and that and the other. And then someone says, may I help you? And what they're saying in cultural terms, through the cultural dogma of chauvinism that devalues anyone who needs help, devalues the feminine. The feminine is the one that can receive. The masculine is the one that can give, be it in a man or a woman. We're not talking about gender here. But for exchange of energy to occur, you have to have a giver and you have to have someone receive. If someone gives and no one receives, if someone tries to receive but no one gives, you don't have an exchange of energy. And when you break down an interaction to a giver and a receiver, the giver is the yang or the masculine, be it a male or a female giving, and the yin is the receiver or the feminine. And so when you say in a chauvinistic culture that receiving is weak and it's bad and it's low status, and someone says, may I help you? What they're saying is, may I occupy the superior position and make you feel weak and insuperior, and low ranking. Well, when you're already feeling terrified and low ranking and unlovable and all that because of the abuse, etc., the last thing you want to do is occupy the low ranking position. Now, receiving is not a low-ranking position. It's a very equal position, and it is a very strong and courageous position in a chauvinistic cult. But you're not going to learn that. And if you've watched 10,000 examples of people being humiliated for needing things, and 10,000 examples of people feeling grandiose and superior for giving things, you're not going to want to receive something. That's not your fault. You've grown up in a fucked up cult that teaches particularly men, and men commit more suicide than women by a factor of 4, particularly men, that it is weak to receive help. Well, that's a fucked up cult, teaching a fucked up teaching that then makes it harder for men to move into a position of saying, yes, please help me. I really need help. And I don't know what it is, another low-ranking position, because in our cult, the person who knows something is superior, the person who doesn't know is inferior. So we're constantly exasperated at people who don't know things. And we're constantly admiring people who know things. And we're constantly dissing people who aren't in control. And we're constantly praising the mastery of people when they're in control. You could look at Avenatti, who was helping Stormy Daniels in his Trump case. And there was a period where he really seemed to be on top of things. And then people wanted him to run for president. And as soon as he made a misstep, or did he make a misstep? It doesn't matter. As soon as he did not accurately predict the outcome of his court case, then people made jokes about him. So he went from possibly running for president to being joked at and ignored. Because when you have a traumatized cult, what they're looking for with desperation, Erich Fromm in his book talks about it in the book Escape from Freedom, the tremendous relief it was for the Germans in a state of shame, trauma, and poverty to have anyone come along and tell them what was going to be done and what to do. And this has nothing to do with Germans relative to the rest of us. It's just that after the First World War, Germany was in incredible poverty, in incredible shame, in incredible uncertainty and beholden, because huge debts for the war were saddled on Germany. And then Hitler came along and wrote his book, Mein Kampf, This is what I'm going to do. And he started doing it. And the most wonderful thing about Hitler is he never doubted himself. And Nassim Taleb talks about this in The Black Swan, how we as Americans and as a public love the overconfident pundit, even though they're statistically wrong a majority of the time. You take the, whatever it is, all the pundits, Fox News, anywhere else, you have a highly confident pundit who's on TV a lot, and they are statistically wrong a majority of the time. But we do not pick who's on TV based on their accuracy. We pick who's on TV based on their position in power, which is in turn determined to a large degree by their confidence, and the assertiveness and clarity with which they pontificate. We like letting someone else, because the truth is, a lot of these things are very complex. You look at, will the country be better off if a Republican or a Democrat will be elected in the United States? The truth is, it's hard to tell. Because there are ripple effects. Because you don't understand the 10-year fallout of this, that, and the other. You may think you do, but you just have to study some of the most informed experts in history and ask them after the fact, when their reputation is no longer on the line, how often they got it wrong, and how often when they got it right it was sheer dumb luck. And you realize that if the top experts are wrong a lot of the time, watch The Fog of War, McNamara, and his agony around the Vietnam War, etc., and not knowing quite what to do in that situation. There's so much of this complexity that is overwhelmingly mind-boggling to you on an individual level. And you feel nervous. It's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So you withdraw. This is a traumatic response. You withdraw, or you fight, or you just freeze in paralysis. And what a strongly confident individual does is they come along and they say, this is the way it is. That's it. It's these people. Hitler said, all your problems are the fault of the Jews. And he started by, burning Germans alive. He rounded up 70,000 German children and murdered them all because they had disabilities. And then he thought, well, that worked well. Why don't we move on to the Jews? And so the Jews are the problem. And he's, he never says, gee, that's a difficult question. I'm going to have to ask my advisors. It's really tough, and the truth is, I don't know. No, he's a maniac. So he knows everything. This is the way it is. And this is you listen to him screaming and shouting, and you say, there's a guy that knows what he's doing. I don't know what I'm doing. My neighbor doesn't know what they're doing. This guy knows what he's doing. I guess we'll vote for him. And then once he gets a little bit of power such that he can turn your own children into informants and put you in prison and all that, well, then you certainly vote for him so you don't get put in prison, and the cycle continues. But this is a process where you have profound dissociation from the assertiveness of the message and the intelligence of the message and the competence of the deliverer. But the statistics say that we as a people vote for confident and assertive people. Now, children do the same thing. Their parents say, this is our little secret. Don't tell your mother about this. Sounds good. So-and-so's got it all figured out. I'll do what dad says. I'll do what mom says. I'll do this. I'll do that, the other. And we give away our power, starting as children, in a contract with the power structure that says, you will let me survive. You will give me some security in that survival, and you will get me some sense of interaction that is called love and belonging and acceptance. And I'll do whatever the fuck I have to do to not be killed in that process. And what is it? What is it that we have to do? So these are things in the environment. These have nothing to do with the child. A child born into Hitler's Germany has no autonomy to stop that. They just have a choice to be rounded up by the Nazis as a defector or something and shot, or go along with an absurd program, or become part of the secret underground and play a risk and risk their family being shot, or this, that, and the other. And it's worth noting. It's worth noting that we've all got the same genetic makeup. We've all got the same human needs to survive, feel secure, and feel love and belonging. And if millions of people on a statistical level behave this way in this country over here, the odds are that if you or I were born over there at that time, that we'd be behaving like that as a statistic. I mean, maybe we'd be the anomaly, the 1 in 100 that doesn't do it that way. And the odds are that if Germans were born into the United States of this year, whatever generation, rather than into Nazi Germany, that they would talk like Americans, look like Americans, and be like Americans. Because that's what the data suggests. So, you have emotional illiteracy, so that you don't understand that for someone to have hatred, they must feel helpless. Which means that rather than helping to heal the helplessness, which would heal the hate, we shame those for expressing the symptoms. It's like a fire alarm going off in the house, beep, beep, beep. And rather than saying, there must be some fire here, let's find out the fire and put it out, and then the smoke detector will stop beeping. We go with a baseball bat and hit the smoke detector. And then another smoke detector goes off because the fire gets bigger, because we're not responding, and we go hit that one out, and then the house burns down. And so this is the kind of incompetence in which our children, in which we grow up in an emotionally illiterate culture. Now, to give you a sense of just how absurd this emotionally illiterate culture is, just keep in mind one fact. There has never been a conscious action in human history that has not been emotionally motivated. There has never been a human act you're aware of it, I'm not talking about sleepwalking, that has not, but even sleepwalking, we're dealing with emotions. Because the way action occurs is you think a thought, and that changes the brain. And based on a series of memories and beliefs and assumptions, etc., and the cultural norms, that thought triggers a series of chemicals in the body. And those chemicals rush to the muscles and move the muscles, such that our body does what we think is the thing to do. Now, there are many conflicting programs inside, and so the dominant one wins. For example, we might say it's wrong to hit a child, so there's a staying impulse, don't do that. But then this child screams again and throws cereal on the floor. And it's like, then a new program comes in. I don't care what the fuck is wrong with hitting a child. I need this to stop. And I think the best way to accomplish that would feel good would be to whack this child over the head, grab them with a scruff of the neck and throw them in their room and lock the door, and then tell them I'm going to hit them again if they don't stop crying. Now I've gotten my piece, and I've just taught that child that communicating feelings is not okay, and that their life is in danger if they continue. And No problem in there, because I don't really want to hear their feelings. I don't want to think about all the things I don't know that I don't know. I don't want to figure out if I'm a good parent or not. That's what my mom did to me. That's what I'm going to do. Feels right, meaning it's familiar. Leave it at that. So we have a fact in which the entire world has been, all the man-made world, every single thing in history, this camera, this blackboard, everything, the people who invented the loom, the people who made this jewelry, the microphone manufacturers, they all did it based on their feelings. And then we're going to send you to education to prepare you for life, right? So you're going to teach me the most powerful science in the history of humankind. Emotional engineering, emotional understanding, bridging, how to connect to other human beings through your emotions, right? You're going to learn the most powerful technology in the entire history of humankind. It's like, no, not exactly. How about algebra? You use that on a daily basis, right? Or trigonometry. Anyone for trigonometry? How about doctored history? Anyone else, for that? How about you're going to write essays that I tell you to write about this and that and the other, and do this, and then you're going to learn kick a ball. Very important skill in life. Let's kick balls. The most important skill in the entire fabric of humanity. Not a single hour. Not a single hour. In fact, and as you express emotions in schools, you'll be humiliated for them. As you start to fall in love, you'll be humiliated for that. As you start to express anger, you'll be punished. So you're not only not going to learn a single goddamn thing about the most important thing in the entire history of humankind, you are going to be flooded with meaningless subjects. And then you're going to be told to shut up about it. As you try and say, well, I remember asking my math teacher, it's like, when's the last time you learned and used any of this in your entire life? And the math teacher said, oh, simple, teaching you this lesson. I said, okay, so let's assume you weren't a math teacher. When's the last time you used any of this in your entire life? He said, nothing. So I said, so for all of us who are not planning on being math teachers, why exactly are the most formative years of our life being diverted away from anything intelligent, like learning sales, starting a business, how to kiss a girl, anything useful at all, you name it, how to drive a car? Why is it that absolutely everything we're going to need to live a great life, how to cook great meals as a bachelor, you name it, list 100 useful skills, why are none of those in the curriculum? And we're being bludgeoned with information that you yourself acknowledge is completely irrelevant for 95% of our lives. There's nothing wrong with calculus, and nothing wrong with it. But there's a lot good with learning to cook a wholesome meal. There's a lot good in learning to build a house. There's a lot good in starting a business, how to build a team. How about that? Or code, how to code. Build an app. There's a lot, or build websites. Could we learn a goddamn thing that's useful for our lives? That's a healthy expression of anger. But what's the response? Go to the back of the room and get a detention because you had the audacity to think in a thoughtless cult that's burying its children under the mud of its own stupidity and then blaming them for being stuck in the mud created by a cult. So it's the same protocol. Dump the incompetencies of the cult onto the child. Make the child feel like shit, then shame them for feeling like shit, then tell them not to talk about that, and then ask them why they aren't getting on and being a winner in their life. You can't get to a more sadistic type of program for chopping the future of these kids to bits. And it's our norm. It's institutionalized. It's illegal not to go to this fucked up system. And our tax money is spent funding it every step of the way. So the environment creates the helplessness. The helplessness leads to hate. You get the erroneous message that having hatred is wrong. Well, that's kind of a bizarre thing, because what if smoke detectors got the message that beeping was wrong because nobody wanted to listen to the noise? Well, who does? But the whole point of a smoke detector is that your house doesn't burn down. Now, if you're so dumb that you don't know that being without a house is worse than listening to screeching beeps in a smoke detector, so you take out the batteries or you don't put any in, then you end up with no house. But in a culture like this, if you're so dumb that you don't know that not changing the environment when your child is feeling tremendous hate, that the hate isn't the problem, and you send your kid off to their room for telling you what's going on, when you're in a culture that's that dumb, it's hard not to feel even more helpless because you're surrounded by idiots. So this ties into, a real phenomena where intelligent children want to kill themselves so that their parents can continue being comfortable in their own stupidity, because they can't bear to listen to the erroneous mathematics. So you're going to learn math, but then you're going to create a cultural equation that is so flawed in its mathematics. 2 plus 2 is not 600. It's never going to be 600. And if you think it is 600, you didn't need to learn math. You needed to learn cultural equations. You needed to learn about probability fields. Again, something useful that you didn't learn anything about. So when my pain was significantly higher than my pleasure, when my helplessness was chronic, and when I had no certainty that those equations could or would change, because I had no one to talk to about it, because when you're in a culture as dumb as ours, if you bring up the subject of suicide, you don't get an intelligent response. You get the message that you're scaring the adult around you, and they don't want to be scared. You get the message that you're the enemy. They'll look at you they'll say, don't talk like that. Don't talk like that, please. Now, carry on. Tell me something else that makes me feel more comfortable. You can't get more narcissistic if you try. You want to commit suicide, and the adult wants to feel comfortable by reassuring themselves that they're in a world where nobody wants to commit suicide, despite the data that says that suicide is one of the leading cause. I believe it's the second cause in teenage deaths in America. It's way up there. Huge cause of deaths. Now, if you don't want to look at the data, but you say you're scientific? I mean, this is so much junk to throw on a kid. And so when the adult begs the child to lie so that the adult doesn't have to feel what the child is going through, so that the adult doesn't have to challenge their comfortable status quo, which particularly in a traumatized culture, everyone wants to say, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine. You listen to these people lying about this. The child's leg gets crushed by a bus. Oh, it's going to be fine. Bullshit. It's a kid without a leg for the rest of their life in a culture that shames handicapped people. It's going to be tough. But if you know it's going to be tough, you can appreciate yourself for surviving in a tough environment. If it's going to be fine, well, how much courage does it take to muster to be fine? None. So it just denigrates the entire effort that it takes for a human being to survive this series of deep traumas over and over again. You know, when you feel like you just barely made it through, clawing through on your hands, and you barely have enough energy to get through tomorrow. And you realize, well, what was all that I just crawled through? You know, I feel like I barely made it alive. And everyone said that was fine. So, you know, it's like it's meaningless. But if people are honest and say, wow, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of starting a successful business, you've got a 1 in 7 chance of being an addict, you've got a maze of deep challenges, number one. Number two, they're not your fault. You're born into a dysfunctional cult with a bunch of people that are going to lie and say that it's all great, and that's going to make it harder for you to see clearly. But this is what you're going to deal with, and this is what you're going to deal with, and this is what you're going to deal with. And if you can face that, if you can work your ass off, even though you may be a minority, there's a good chance you'd come through here. And if you do, bravo to you. Bravo that you worked your ass off to overcome all of this cultural stupidity. Bravo. Well, then you understand what a big deal it is, and it's worth fighting for, and you don't blame yourself for the fact that you feel half dead. Just like you don't blame yourself for the fact that you're showing symptoms of other people's incompetence and abuse. Now, a lot of what I'm doing with this is I'm putting back the shame and stupidity that is dumped on our children where it belongs. Because if a kid that's 6 years old, well, let's put it the other way. If a 60-year-old millionaire politician can't figure this out and do the right thing, what the fuck is a 6-year-old going to do growing up in a crazy-making cult? If anyone is going to take responsibility, it's got to be the smartest, wealthiest, most educated, most scientific, competent human beings on the planet who are not 6 years old. And if they fucked it up and can't do any better than this, then give that 6-year-old a break, because he's not going to do any better. She's not going to do any better. But it's that 6-year-old who's crying alone in their room because Mr. Superiority at the dinner table would not allow someone to challenge the narrative that didn't make sense, wouldn't allow a deep dialogue into the underlying helplessness beneath that hatred, the underlying inner divide between wanting to please the parent and wanting to survive in an environment in which the parent is the biggest threat to the child's sanity and safety. In a culture that says you're supposed to love and obey your parents, regardless of how fucked up they are. So this is a very difficult terrain. And what some kids do is they kill themselves or fantasize. A lot of them fantasize. And what they're fantasizing about is, wouldn't it be nice for my parents? I mean, let's look at the data. My parents are always saying that I've ruined their life. They're always saying it's my fault. Idiots, but I can't say that. I'm a 6-year-old. If I accept the fact that my parents are an idiot, then I'm fucked. And I don't know how to deal with being fucked, so I've got to pretend my parents know what they're doing. So they say it's all my fault. It must be all my fault. I can't afford to bring up the truth that I'm being raised by idiots. So the child owns it, the child cries, the child is, and if the parent has some degree of maturity, at some point they'll take a little bit of the weight off the child and say, oh, well, it's not all your fault. 95% of the whole universe is your fault, and you did ruin my life. But I may have had something to do with it by choosing not to wear a condom. I may have had something to do with it by hitting you as a giant hits you. I mean, if you have a 30-foot giant, you step outside your house today and you hear a booming voice and a 30-foot giant swoops down and gives you a clap on the head and says, I'm going to kill you if you don't do this. If you don't have PTSD in a few days, you're probably in a sociopathic state. These are huge events for a young child, a young infant. And the data shows that all of our efforts to pretend that kids grow out of it and doesn't affect them at all is a lie. We do very little research on that because we don't like looking at it. We're a shadow-averse culture. But it's a lie. The reality is your suicide rate goes up by hundreds and hundreds of percent. Your time in hospital goes up. Your income goes down. Your social network goes down. Your anxiety goes up. Your self-esteem goes down. For life. Unless you do a lot of fucking work in a psychologically illiterate culture to fix what other people you're learning from don't even know enough to know that they broke. You're in an environment where older people around you are so dumb they don't know what they broke. And you, as someone who's supposed to be learning from them, are growing up in that environment having to fix what other people don't even know that they broke. That's a lot of work. Takes a lot of courage. Good on you. It's a miracle you're still alive. It's a miracle that you're still alive. So, and it was not easy. So, when I was looking at dying, I was very aware of the amount of pain I was in. I was also not aware of how to fix it. My parents' marriage was going downhill. I was watching my siblings be abused. I was watching my parents abuse each other. I was watching my siblings abuse each other. I was watching my parents abuse me. And I was watching the entire adult body around me try and protect my parents. I mean, this is the stupidity of this cult and its cowardice. There was a woman, Kyle Morton, who was my sole contact. And to be fair, it was very valuable to be able to talk with a single adult human being. Very valuable. An hour a week. However, anything towards hate, anger, anything towards any of this, I never talked to her about suicide because it would have upset her. Just think of this. 14-year-old kids, suicidal, trying to stop and she was a teacher at Waldorf School, trying to stop their elders from being upset. When the elders are too incompetent to grasp the reality of the child and to validate it. It's an incredible degree of incompetence, of betrayal, of dishonesty and cowardice. But it's not framed that way. It's framed for my 14-year-old boy of this is the Christian thing to do. Don't talk about your parents like that. No, they're really working very hard for this and that and the other. And it's not that that isn't true, by the way. It's just, why do the parents need more protection than the child's feelings? Because the other side of that coin was never said. you're going through trauma and PTSD. You're in a profoundly dysfunctional cult. The Waldorf school that I participated didn't bother to teach you any useful subjects, so you're having to learn them on your own. I left to go to do my own homeschooling. And because you've had to left, because we were so incompetent, you're socially isolated. And you're surrounded by insanity, people who think they're metaphysicians while they're inducing, pain and humiliation and this and that and the other. And then I'm here trying to teach you how to be a good Christian rather than understanding the underlying elements in the environment, which is basically saying your parents' feelings are more important to me than yours. It's a very dicey thing. Like, how far can I tell the truth with a single adult before I become the target? Before, it's like I'm another big disappointment to my soul contact, with the outside world. So this burden of carrying all of that is not carried by anyone else. Meaning my mother never calls up and says, gee, that must have been tough for you. Tell me about it. Kyle never calls up and says, what could I have done better? How do you feel about our relationship back there? When I told my dad about it just before he died, he replied that he had loved me unconditionally since the day I was born. And you have to understand how sadistic it is when someone's watched 3 siblings out of 5 be on the edge of suicide for decades, waves of pain and this and that and the other, to turn around and call all the abuse that induced all of that unconditional love. It's the biggest blame flip imaginable, because what it's saying is I'm untouchable. I love unconditionally. I don't even love conditionally. I've loved you unconditionally since the day I was born. The message being that if you have any problems about our relationship, like if you didn't like being beaten, you didn't like having your ear pulled, you didn't like being hit with a belt, you didn't like being spanked, you didn't like being locked in your room, you didn't like being humiliated, you didn't like doing this, you didn't like being lied to, you didn't like you didn't like that? Well, tough luck, because that's unconditional love. And I was the one who was unconditional love. You're the fucked up person who's crying and weeping and doing all this stuff. That's you. I am the superhuman parent who doesn't make any mistakes. And now, and we involve, we're in spiritual meditation and all that. And you're now the angry, immature adult who can't let this go. That's what you are now. First, you were the cause of all of our problems. Then you ruined our lives. Then you brought up things that children shouldn't have brought up. And now, you're still ruining our lives when we're meditating in positive prayer and this and that. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. And when you've gotten that message since you were 2 years old, it's not new. It's just incredibly depressing. Is there ever going to be a single adult in the entire planet who's actually going to care more for the child than the abuser? And the answer is unknown. I haven't met that person. I haven't met that person. So, and you'll get a little bit of that, from a therapist. It's like you have to pay them a few $100 an hour, and they'll actually say, you were right. It's like, that's how much you have to bribe someone in this cult in order to get them to actually stand up for a child? Like you talk to your friends, stop being negative. Stop being negative. What if I pay you $200 an hour? Oh, now you're doing therapy. Sure, I'll take the money. Okay, what do I have to say? Okay, good work. Come back next week. And I'll just sit here and scribble, and you can pay me another $200. But, we don't really want to know, and we're not going to do anything about it. And the therapist is the one person in the entire equation who's never going to change your life. It's not like your parents calling and saying, wow, you're absolutely right, that was dreadful. It's someone else who isn't there. It's not your wife or your, whatever, who's saying, gee, I have been a bit of a nag, I'm sorry. It's the therapist saying, yes, your wife sounds like a bit of a nag. Well, that doesn't do much good. I'm 24/7 with my wife, and I have to come and pay and, drive to see you. Well, that's what I'm here for, to take your money and listen to what you have to say. Therapy, in short, is not terribly effective. Not terribly. I wouldn't discourage it, because you're in this situation where we have such an abominable level of technology that many of the options provide a 10 to 20% benefit, and they're expensive and tedious. So is it going to get better? I've done $150,000 in therapy. And have I gotten better? Well, I think it's an improvement that I'm saying all this. Because in saying this, I'm not protecting my therapists, something I've done a lot of. I'm not protecting my parents. I'm not protecting Kyle. I'm not protecting my dead father. I'm actually saying that my feelings, and by extension your feelings, are more important for your well-being than anyone else in your life. Your feelings and your truth, by extension, is more important than anyone who abused you. Your abuser's feelings are not more important to me than your feelings. Your therapist's feelings about any of their incompetence is not as important to me as your feelings of frustration, because I felt immense frustration week after week. I'd do up to 6 hours of therapy a week with 3 practitioners, just trying, a little bit like AIDS. They'd hit it with a triad of drugs because it didn't really seem to fix and never went away. It just managed it. Well, that was my experience of trauma. Nobody talked about trauma, so I was trauma illiterate. But I would do 3 different therapists, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, and, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And, so there's $1,000 right there. And so, that's, I would manage it. And then it'd come back, much like an AIDS approach to, dealing with AIDS. You take a cocktail of drugs, you keep refining it, and you hold it at bay. That's not terribly exciting, particularly at that rate, at 50 grand a year. And with the IRS telling you that you have to pay taxes on that, it's not terribly exciting. You could explain the logic of that to the IRS. Okay, Mr. IRS man, how much taxes do you think you're going to get from me if I'm dead? Do the math. You're mathematicians. Do the math. So let's get straight here. You take half of my money. You're not going to get a fucking cent if I'm dead. Are you keeping me alive with all your fucking paperwork and bullshit? Not a bit of it. I'm keeping myself alive with $1,000 a week in therapies, okay? Now you want to tax me on that, do you? In addition, you want to take half of the money. You want me to spend $1,500 a week so that you can take half of my money. We're getting a little off track. I just want to pop the lid off the idea that this cult that we call whatever it is that is your country is sacrosanct and more important than the health and the well-being of the child. Your child, you, your parents' child, that the adult's comfort in all of its stupidity is more important than the health and well-being of the child. It is not. It is not. And if you don't protect the child, they become the next generation of idiotic adults. And that happens a lot easier if you don't acknowledge the idiocy. If you say this is highly intelligent, you sit there and smoke a pipe, whatever it is, the archetype of the sophisticated grown-up of the day, the suit, the hat, whatever it is, the car. If you don't understand that that's idiocy, you can't make a change. You've got to begin with the awareness that it could be 10 times better and look at the areas that it's not, or you can't change. So what I did at age 14 to manage helplessness was, first of all, I studied survival courses. I read books. How would I eat this in the woods? Because I thought, I've got living here in hell with my parents and waiting it out. I've got going into the woods and dealing with all the crap, which I'll be hunted down by the police, and like they're saving me, right, to return me to a place where I want to kill myself. So I'll be hunted by the police, but how could I do this, not the other, and what's the and I really went deep into that, mapping this out, what would I do in the winter when it was snowing, and what was this, and and could I. I've been vegetarian, but you can't, if you don't have any money, you can't live in the forest as a vegetarian. So, how would I feel about, hunting animals to stay alive? And what was North Vancouver at the time, so it's got snow up in the mountains just a few minutes away, at least half the year. And so it's a big issue. Now, figuring that out and giving me a choice gave me a sense of power. I really worked on the plan B, I read library books, etc. And I decided, okay, so out there I'm hunted, out there I have to hunt animals, I have to live in a tent, I have to avoid, criminals, that may be running around, kids trying to, we raise kids that hate people because they feel powerless and frustrated. And so a group of kids comes across someone in a tent, and their first instinct is, how can I hurt that person? It should give you a clue as to the kind of cult that we're raising people in. But, it's when you're feeling like you've got to go off and do this just to survive and get through the day, having, other people in a gang, 3 or 4 people, set out to ruin your little slim chance of survival is a miserable experience. And that's one of the reasons it gives them so much power. They understand how important it is to you, and that's exactly where they're getting their own value from, in a cult that steals value from the children. And so then they steal it from each other. So, I was very thoughtful about all that. And then I had a backup plan. So I thought, okay, I've got this in place. I can head off into the woods, and I know what I'm doing. But let's do the math, okay, so I've got to listen to X minutes of screaming, X minutes of whining, X minute of manipulation, X minute of abuse per day in this house. But how can I manage that? I can put headphones on. I can put a lock on my door. I can busy focus on my goals. I can get out of the house a few hours a day. I can do this. And, overall, I think I can make it a few more years. So I hung in there till I was 17. And that's when Kyle, who certainly wouldn't go into these psychological terrains, did a real favor by helping me live in her house, from which I could actually start a business and then, begin the process of migrating into my own life, which was, of course, very empowering, and immediately ended all thoughts of suicide. So having goals, making progress helped with the hopelessness. Having backup plans, really doing the analysis of what was in my best interest, all very, very helpful. Writing diaries. This is what happened. This is what I felt about what happened. This is what I think about what happened, and this is what I'm going to do in response to that. Very helpful. I wrote this wheel to just be sure to touch on all of the terrain. And so perhaps we'll take a little pause here and, then step back and look at, this terrain here. So we've covered a little bit that, one of the aspects that, leads to a logical sense of wanting to kill yourself is no way to win. Another is being shamed when you're blamed for everyone else's mistakes. Another reason, when you are unfairly hurt and then blamed for expressing the hurt, one of the things that does is it crystallizes into hostility. Hostility is hurt that is helpless to be healed. Usually ties in with shame, because someone hurts you, like your dad hits you, and then you say, ow! And then he says, don't talk to your father about that. So he's now punishing you for reacting to his abuse. And then you say, well, that hurt me. And he then blames you rather than his own lack of temper or anything. So he says, well, you're an idiot, whatever. So all this hurts. And you realize that no matter what you say, it keeps getting thrown back in your lap and you don't have the power. You don't have anything that you can do. You're a 6-footer and there's a 30-foot giant. I mean, please understand, this is not unique to childhood. If tomorrow morning you wake up and you are surrounded by 30-foot giants with this kind of stupidity and abusive behavior, the way your parents treated you, it's not going to be easy. You're going to be in terror. You're going to be in shame. You're going to be regret, all kinds of things. You're going to be trying to, what do I have to do to please them? How can I keep? What do I have to lie? All this stuff. Because there's 30-foot giants. And so revenge becomes one of the goals. And it's worth noting that revenge is, or the thought of revenge. I mean, who knows what it's, how it is actually when you're dead. But certainly the thought of revenge is incredibly satisfying because they can't intimidate you when you're dead. Can't intimidate me. Can't lie to me anymore. Can't use me anymore. And they can't pretend that they were great parents. Because even in our cult, the odd person is going to say, I thought those were good parents, but at least 1 in 5 of their children, maybe 2 or 3, have killed themselves. Not very ideal. I mean, people who are having a great time do not kill themselves. You have to understand what an amazing thing suicide is, first of all, and it should give you a clue into how dysfunctional our cult is. Monkeys do not commit suicide. There's one monkey in the Philippines that I'm aware of called the tarsier monkey. It's a tiny little monkey that commits suicide. And only in very abusive situations. This is a monkey that moves incredibly slow. You see that finger moving? That's how slow a tarsier monkey moves. And it likes quiet. And it likes to be left alone. So, of course, the sociopathic culture that we are, all the tourists rush over to click and flash and shout and talk around the tarsier monkeys. They can't do anything about it because the Philippine government has decided to protect the income stream, not the monkeys. In this case, the monkey represents the child. So this monkey which likes to be left in complete peace and isolation, having been a unique, because it's so small, monkey, is regularly tortured by the tourist protocol. When it is tortured enough, it will kill itself. But I don't know of another animal that kills themselves. There are millions, and they're not killing themselves. So it's a pretty big deal in nature's pattern that suicide is the second leading cause of death, for example, for teenagers. It's a big deal. It's a phenomenal thing. And what's even more phenomenal is that we put the emphasis on the people who want to commit suicide. I mean, how dumb would it be to ask a tarsier monkey, while flashes are clicking and this and that, the other, why don't you have a positive attitude about life? Why don't you do this and that and the other? I mean, just imagine the stupidity of that. Because any wildlife expert would say, you idiot, because you're flashing. That's why he wants to kill himself, because you're doing the exact opposite of what feels good to the tarsier monkey. And you're doing it day after day. And the tarsier monkey finally has a brainwave and says, oh, I could escape all these idiotic tourists by killing myself. And punish the bastards at the same time. So it's a bizarre form of abusing the abused to put the emphasis on why do you want to kill yourself? And please don't, because it would make me uncomfortable. It's absolutely sociopathic and absurd. But this is what, of course, we do, which is exactly why many people planning on killing themselves don't tell anyone. Because they don't want to deal with the burden of your shit. They don't, you don't, if you're trying to kill yourself, want to deal with the burden of other people's shit. If you're not going to get any help to support, to end your life, and you're just going to get a guilt trip, exactly what's the deal here? Of course, I'm not going to tell anyone. And of course, when you can't tell anyone, you preclude the option of potentially discovering, I could actually do something else. The tarsier monkeys can't escape their cages and all the tourists and stuff. But maybe you could. Maybe you could. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So it's not your fault. Human cultures are one of the rarest phenomena in the ecological environment that drive people to death. The odds of a human being wanting to kill themselves in a healthy environment attuned to their needs, in which their survival, their security of survival, their sense of love and belonging and esteem are being built and are intact. The odds are minuscule. Which means that if you want to die, you don't see an easy alternative. Now, a lot of this is carrying the abuser's shame. Meaning there are alternatives, and it's because when your parent says, you ruined my life, but I forgive you. You caused this, but, you can pay me back later. You made me lose my job, you did this. And basically blames everything wrong on the child. And the parent does that. If the child accepts all of that, the parent feels better and may even have some hope of loving the child, which is a desperate need of every unloved child to be loved. Well, here's, I think, what the abuser is wanting to hear. I'm so sorry, Dad. You're absolutely right. I did ruin your life, and you didn't deserve that. I ruined your life. You were wearing a condom, you had all the birth control, you were that, and I just arrived just to punish you. It was all my fault. The fact that you didn't know how to express your feelings, completely my fault. The fact that you lost your temper and had PTSD. I've no doubt about it that in the life before this, I was secretly manipulating your father who abused you, and it's all my fault. I was in government at the time, just before being born, busily writing education policy to make sure that we would have a completely illiterate, emotionally illiterate populace, because I wanted to have people as confused about their feelings as possible. And I knew that if you had a good boss, you'd probably be a good dad. So I went out of my way to, in another lifetime, have an affair with your boss's wife, just to really fuck them over. And, and I sent a subliminal message tape. So your boss knew that his life was ruined because of you. So he would punish you. And I did several other things, which you probably wouldn't understand, but just trust me, I apologize profusely for ruining your life. And I know that you couldn't have sorted this out. You're a busy and important man. How could you possibly study, intergenerational abuse subjects or cycles? How could you have said, Dane, maybe we could talk about this. And I know you couldn't have asked me for an apology for all the ruinous things that I've done to your life. You couldn't have asked me, because that would have meant I would ruin your life even more. And, we couldn't have that after I've ruined it this far, to have me ruin it even more. So I'm terribly sorry. You're absolutely right. Now, you only beat me this amount, and you only whipped me this amount, you only shamed me this amount, and you only lied to me this amount. You could have done it 24/7, and I would have still deserved it. But out of your grace and kindness, you held it in check at an average of 10%. A mere 10% of, severe traumatizing abuse. Could have been 80%. And I'd have deserved every bit of it. Wasn't your fault. And I want to make it up for you, because you're an amazing dad. I mean, what can I do? Should I listen to the same old story that you've told 200 or 300 times? I could do that. And it's my fault that I get bored with these things, because you have very interesting stories. Even the 300th time, the nuance with which you go into it is profound. But silly old me, I get bored with that kind of thing and wonder if I could get a word in edgeways. No, that's a mistake. I apologize. I apologize for existing. In fact, would you like me to kill myself? Cut me in half, do this. My life is yours, and you didn't deserve the wrongs that were done to you. And I'm sorry it's taken me this long. You had to wait 44 years before I was mature enough to take full responsibility for ruining your life. So, you need money, Dad? You shouldn't work. No, I won't hear about it. Walking over and getting your own iced tea? No. You sit down, Dad. Let me get you a beer. Let me get, not one beer from my father. Here, 12 packs of beer. And TV isn't big enough? Up, someone made a noise in the background. Let's clear out the house. This is about you, Dad. And, I'm sorry that it has taken this long. Well, you see, after a performance like that, one might get a little grumble of, well, you're not the worst son. You're better than your sister. You're better than your sister. Look at her. I ruined her life, but, does she thank me? No. At least you sit here. So you just sit there and, I'll hit your head when I want another beer. I'll complain that you didn't massage me accurately and da-da-da-da-da. And you're not as bad as your sister. So this would be the great, accumulation of, the pinnacle of praise. So that would make the abuser feel better. And if you haven't done that to whoever has abused you to the point of suicide, or the many, that avenue lies available. And we're just getting started. There's, 10 pages of profuse apologetic remorse for existing. So this is a tack that makes the abuser feel a little better on some level. The best part of them feels a bit sick. But of course, it's not the best part of them who is abusing you. Their best part has been consumed by the abuse cycle that abused them. Just like the best part of you is at risk, real risk of being consumed by this abuse cycle. And it's got to be talked about. I'm doing a little bit of release and healing here by telling the truth. You can't fix AIDS if you say, no, I don't have AIDS, I just know it, and I'm not going to get a test. If I get a test, I'm sure it's wrong, and I'm not going to take any medicine either because, I'm going to be positive about things, and if it's my time, it's my time. You can't cure AIDS that way. You can't make money that way. You've got to recognize the issue and how big it is, and then look at the response. So, finishing up on revenge, it fucks people up when you commit suicide. So, the process comes in, pain comes in. Then pain does not get helped and lifted out in a way that works. So it goes into this hurt. If other people, and if a more intelligent culture could have responded to that, or could have avoided doing that, it wouldn't have gone into pain and hurt. If a better culture and environment had lifted that out, or if you had had the technology to lift that out, or the will, because there's a lot that gets programmed in at young infancy. If you had had that technology, that may not migrate down into hostility, the kind of hurt that is so helpless about being fixed that its only pleasure is hurting other people. It's a little bit like envy. And there's no doubt about it. You can kill yourself any day of the week and fuck people up. They'll doubt themselves. Should they have done this? Should they have done that? Etc. And it's the greatest teenage fantasy around, when you're in absolute hell and agony. What are they gonna do? How are they gonna do that? They can't shout at me anymore because I'm dead. They can't beat me anymore. I don't feel anything. If they want to go in there with a golf club and batter me, have at it. Waste your energy, Dad. I'm not there. It's a tremendously liberating fantasy. And it takes some of the hurt that's been given to you and gives it back to the family, to the culture, to the family system, and says, I'm not carrying this anymore. It's time for you to carry it. It's an honest path to revenge, meaning it is likely. Not always, because there's dynamics, like if you really want to have revenge, succeed beautifully and tell the truth positively and negatively, and don't shield your abuser. Because that's even more irritating in some way, because one of the things that families do when you kill yourself is they've seen you stomping around in your room, they've seen the gin bottles pile up, they've watched you falling to pieces, and I couldn't possibly do anything, and they tiptoe around and avoid you and all that, because they're very uncomfortable, because we are a trauma illiterate culture. We don't know how to do any of this stuff. It's not particularly personal to you or anyone else. It's just the kind of education system we have. So in this scenario, they're just kind of waiting to a certain extent for you to kill yourself. And then, they can say, if only we could have done this, if only, but, and I went by and knocked, but they didn't answer. I tried to bring some this, but I called once, but, it didn't answer, didn't return my call. I wish, they can still blame you when you're dead, is my point. But if you grow, if you move on, if you create, an abundance of new something or other, if you throw all that garbage out, and it takes time, a lot, grief and effort and support and help, and it's by no means saying this is easy. It's some of the hardest work you will ever do. But if you tell the truth, talk about this, make a video about this, tell your whole family system, this is the dynamic. Well, they'll be very uncomfortable. I didn't do it that. No, that wasn't that. That's not me. I did the best I could. So you don't have to kill yourself in order to have revenge is one thing. And one of the sweetest revenges is success, and is transmuting into a more positive life. Now, another factor I touched on, at least for myself, but it's more than 70% of Americans feel lonely periodically, some intensely so. And there's that phenomena where you can feel more lonely in a crowded room than alone. And the reason is, can you be honest? Now, why am I making this recording for the first time at 44 years old? And why am I doing it to a camera and to a stranger rather than having this conversation with Kyle? Well, I called Kyle and she didn't return my call. I sent, some stuff around this to my sister, and it gets a little bit too close to home, And so, you're in a cult dynamic where nobody wants to talk about important things, where the more important the thing is that you bring up to talk about, the less the people will respond. So, how do you deal with this, dynamic? Well, you can just make it public. You can put it out there in the larger sense, symbolically saying, I'm no longer hiding your secret for you. Once your dad dies in profound denial and shame, meaning dumping all the inadequacy onto you, you can start talking with that little boy, that little child in there, and say, it doesn't matter how much you hold dad's secret or mom's secret or this, that, or the other. It doesn't matter how much you perform in this, that, the other. They're not going to give you the thing that you really needed at the time. But I will do my best by living a richer life. And the loneliness comes when you're in an environment where the most significant parts of who you are not welcome. Where the most important truths you have to speak are taboo, where the perspectives and opinions you have, people would rather die or have you die than go into them because they make them uncomfortable. There's a very phenomenal pattern in human culture where people prefer pain to being uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable topic. And some people would rather die than deal with an uncomfortable topic. So they kill themselves or kill other people or run away or, whatever it is. Now, another great, an important part of this is medical suicide. The phenomena where you're going to engage with an illness that is going to see you more and more in pain with no hope of recovery. And so you want to end your life as a humane act, meaning you've already entered a probability field in which you're, whether you call it suicide or illness or whatever it is, you're going to die. And you're going into dementia, you're going into this and that and the other, and you want to end it on a good note. And this is a very different type of intention and situation. You can generally gather a certain amount of friends, if they're not complete cowards, who will participate in this process. It's not without controversy, meaning none of us fully know what's on the other side. And I was just talking with an elderly gentleman who's gone through an extraordinary amount of physical pain over a recent operation, and he was thinking of suicide. And, and he said, the pain was just so intense that I had to make it my friend. And I had to meditate with pain. You couldn't clear your mind, so it's be present with the pain. He said he learned a great deal. Very, very painfully, but learned a great deal. And so pain is a powerful teacher. Fear is a powerful teacher. Trauma is a powerful master and can be a powerful teacher. I think it needs to be a personal decision about how, why, and when to die, in a way that it was not a personal decision about how, why, and when to be born. At least I've never met anyone who remembered that decision, and certainly don't remember that decision on my own. There's a lot of focus on materialism and all that. I don't personally buy it. But that is a matter of faith either way. If you have faith that nothing else exists after death, that's an act of faith. And if you have faith that it does, that's an act of faith as well. I tend to think that the multiverse is far more interesting and complex than the human brain can grasp. And it would be far more interesting and complex if human beings became something more after death than if they didn't. And since I have faith in that infinite complexity and that infinite, variety of stuff, it just seems like it's more efficient to have something move to the next level rather than just totally end. But we will all explore that in due time. But I think when, how, and why to die is a very powerful choice, and it's worth thinking about. And a medical deterioration or emergency is certainly one factor. We put our pets down because we don't want them to suffer.